Welcome to today's ASCI webinar, Ethics in Supply Chain Management. I'm Monique Fenech from Australasian Supply Chain Institute, and a quick technical check while we're still waiting on attendees to join us. If you can hear me, please raise your hand. Thanks very much for that. Next slide, please. The webinar agenda today is a short update from the ASCI National Office before an introduction to the Ethics Management Program by our Ethics Chair, Tim Proust. And then there'll be keynote addresses from Robin Mellon and Nicholas Bernhard. There's a live Q&A registration session after today's webinar. That is after 2 o'clock. If you can stick around, and if you have any questions about registration under our professional accreditation scheme, please stay back. There'll be Q&As today, no polls, but Q&As, so please pop your question in the Q&A box in the dashboard there, and there'll be questions answered as well in the closed LinkedIn group after the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and posted to the ASCI YouTube channel. 1 CPD point is awarded to members for today's webinar, and we do hope that you enjoy the content. We've got a lot to get through, so next slide, please. An update from the National Office is that we have a new registration class called the Associate Registration, and that involves both all of the 4 streams: operations, procurement, logistics, and integrated logistics support. There's only 150 eligibility points required in your work history, professional certification and tertiary education passed. So it's a really great way to get started on the professional accreditation scheme. So afterwards, after today's webinar, I will actually be going through the spreadsheet for this self-assessment tool and the points that are required for the associate level. So it's super easy for you to register, just given some of the work history that you've already done in supply chain management, and it's free. On the CPD program update front, we do have our AGM this Saturday. If you're a financial member of ASCI, you can join. So log into the website in order to see the invite to that event on Saturday. The award nominations close on next Monday, the 30th of November. So do have a look at the categories available to you on our conference website. So that is, that's fast approaching. So I'm sure everyone's had really great years in terms of what you've been able to achieve under such challenging circumstances. So we'd love to hear your entry. And also the sale ends on the 30th of November for our APIX learning systems. You get 10% off, so it's really worthwhile jumping in and purchasing those now ahead of your study next year. We're also working with the Ethical Trade Alliance. There's a scholarship available. If you're under 30 years of age, you can apply for this 4-day short course, and applications close on the 30th of November. I'll share the information in the chat box straight after I present. But essentially this is calling young leaders to learn about modern slavery, human trafficking, and forced labour. It's an intensive program that will give delegates the opportunity to build regional networks with other young leaders, collaborate, exchange knowledge, and learn from leading professionals, and engage in capacity building workshops. So don't miss that opportunity if you're lucky enough to fall into that demographic. And our conference, which is February next year, we're really lucky in that we've submitted to Austrade for a grant, which will allow for delegates and sponsors to receive massive discounts off their entire costs of attending the conference, whether that be the travel, the accommodation, and the ticket sale. So please look out for more information about that, or contact our conference organisers, Prime Creative Media. Next slide, please. Okay, and introducing today's keynote from ASCI is Tim Proust, ASCI Ethics Management Committee Chair. Tim, I'll ask you to unmute yourself and show your face on the screen. Thank you. Tim is a logistics management professional with over 20 years in import, export, warehousing, and domestic freight management. Currently, he is National Logistics Manager at Toshiba, where he brings considerable experience managing sales, administration teams, and process quality initiatives. As Ethics Management Committee Chair, Tim leads a team of volunteers within the ASCI community who have compiled the Ethics Management Program, Code of Ethics, and Ethics Complaints Procedures in line with legislation. Over to you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Monique. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to be involved in this, the first of the Ethics Management Program webinars that I've been involved in. So let's move along. So just to kick off, we just recently conducted a survey or a poll amongst the community, the supply chain community, regarding ethical issues on a broad basis. And of course, we found that COVID has exacerbated unethical practices. I know that for a fact within the job I perform, and some of the things that have happened around us in terms of in the last 3 to 4 months. But supply chain leaders generally participated in a poll this month for Global Ethics Day, and 94% of them cited at least one unethical issue in their supply chain when presented with the following options. So COVID itself presented a whole subset of ethical issues, according to 68% of the respondents. Misconduct, generally, that's a fairly broad subject, but there's another 19%. Black market, 16%. Bribery, 13%. Modern slavery, 9%. Discrimination, 6%. Child labour, 9%. Food fraud, 9%. So obviously there were there's some multiple choice things there to choose from. So COVID itself, it doesn't surprise me that COVID has presented a whole lot of issues in its own right. And a lot of them most of them are external, and a lot of them, in my experience recently, have come out of suppliers in the freight industry not doing the right thing. And I'll leave it at that for the moment, but I can see why that is a big issue for people. Okay, thanks. So also as part of that poll or survey, nearly half of the respondents to the member poll, 40%, said that they didn't have access to resources such as experts, supplier visibility, external assistance, and legal advice. That to me is a very telling percentage, and it kind of goes to the heart of why, or one of the reasons we have an ethics committee within ASCI. So it seems like we've got a real challenge there and a real opportunity to help address or help those 40% who don't have the right resources or expertise to address some of these issues. So that's something that we're going to be working on as part of our remit. Of those who did have access, 16% said the resources didn't allow appropriate confidentiality. So not only is there not the resources available, those that do have them are not particularly confident about the confidentiality of it. So that's yet another challenge for us to look at. Thank you. So this slide here, it sort of encapsulates where ASCI fits into the professionalisation of the industry, obviously with the top box there talking about advancing the supply chain as a recognised profession within Australasia. We have under that we have the professional accreditation scheme, the continuing, the CPD part of it, like we're doing today. Advocacy, which is something our ethics team's working on right now, and growing the community. In other words, getting more cross-section of supply chain people involved in the community. And in support of all those things, we have an ethics committee, of which I'm the chair. We have a risk committee and a technical committee as well. Thank you. So the ASCI Ethics Program, an overview of that is what we've composed here as our value proposition. So, and we've tried to keep this as not as a motherhood statement, but as a statement about what we actually do and want to be doing moving ahead as we develop the whole program. So through the management plan, the MP, we want to offer all classes of members access to a complete and unique professionalisation-based ethics program. That includes a full complaints process, including disciplinary penalties and appeals, access to relevant coaching, guidance, webinars and advocacy services, and for registrants, an agreed professional conduct statement with prescribed expected standards of conduct and principles covering ethics in the supply chain. So you can see in there, we've got within those 3 bullet points, there's a lot of meat behind that that needs to be, and it has been put together, but some of it needs a bit more development, and we're working on that now. So with the current EMP Ethics Management Program, we have a very comprehensive document together that addresses all these things. And at the moment, we're just fine-tuning it. So we're actually very, very proud of what we've done. And while I'm on this subject, as far as the Ethics Committee goes, we would dearly like to get or ask for interest from anyone who would like to join the committee as a volunteer. Essentially, it's an hour a month on a Thursday evening through, obviously through Skype or Teams or whatever. And we're just looking for people from the industry, from the supply chain industry broadly, who would like to probably expand their view of how the supply chain operates, particularly in the area of ethics. It's a huge area and it's growing very rapidly. So I'll just give you an email address now, inquiries@asci.org.au, and maybe Monique, you could repeat that at the end of the show. It'd be really good. And you know, we'd really like to hear from anybody who's interested in this part of the business. It'd be really good. Thanks, Monique. So I'll introduce the guest speakers. Is that the way to go, Monique?
Yeah, go for it, Tim. Thank you.
Okay. So we have 2 guests who have offered their time today to go through some very interesting aspects of ethics. We firstly have Nicholas Bernhardt, who's the CEO of Informed 365, and he's a co-founder of ESG, Environmental Social Governance, corporate social responsibility tech company. So Informed 365 has one simple mission: to help clients make better, more informed decisions. Informed 365 helps any organisation, from non-profits to global enterprises to governments, to visualise critical data in a meaningful way that allows them to understand their data. He came in from the dark side, having been an investment banker who held senior management roles at Standard Chartered Bank, Nomura Securities and Amico Financial Services. So welcome, Nicholas. Also, we have Robin Mellon, who's a New South Wales Program Advisor for Better Building Services. So from 2016 to 2019, Robin was CEO of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, an ASCI collaboration partner that provides free sustainability learning resources and materials for companies of every size around the property, construction and infrastructure sectors in order to improve their supply chains. Prior to that, Robin worked with the Green Building Council of Australia from 2007 to 2015 to drive the adoption of the Green Star rating system for buildings and communities. Actually, I'm sitting in one of those buildings now that's been rated by the Green Building Society of Australia. And as Chief Operating Officer, spearheaded the GBCA's advocacy and international work and mentored a number of countries, including Israel and Hong Kong, through the process of establishing their own green building councils. Robin also sat on the World Green Building Council's Policy Task Force, chaired its Asia Pacific network and has collaborated with Austrade over many years to showcase Australian sustainability strategies. An accomplished presenter, educator and media commentator, Robin is the author of numerous articles on how Australia can capture the benefits of efficient, healthy, livable, productive and resilient buildings, as well as more sustainable supply chains. Robin is also a regular judge of Green Building and Urban Design Awards, a member of the Australian Government's Modern Slavery Advisory Committee, and has been a judging chair for the New South Wales Green Global Awards, the Architecture and Design Awards, and the Australian Green Global Awards. So over to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that was the full hour after we've got through those introductions. Thank you for the introductions and the opportunity to be here. As we begin this afternoon, I should acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all gathered this afternoon. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm joining this webinar from Gadigal land here in Eastern Sydney, and would like to acknowledge those traditional custodians. What I'd like to do to begin with, before I hand over to Nicholas, is just really set the scene around modern slavery. Tim and Monique have explained sort of the levels of knowledge around the virtual room. So what I'm going to try and do is make a very quick sort of entry to where we are now, and then talk about some of the issues that are affecting not just Australian, but Asia Pacific and global supply chains, and look at some of the ways out of that, including the level of collaboration that we're seeing at the Property Council supplier platform, and that provides a neat segue for Nicholas to talk about really what people are seeing from the platform and other interfaces which are emerging. Let me the last decade, as I'm sure you will have seen, has seen a real broadening from the traditional definitions of environmental sustainability. Tim was talking about the green building he's in, so energy, water and waste. There's been a rapid increase in focus on economic sustainability, so not just supply chain awareness, but risk management that Tim was mentioning, and resilience issues, business, community, shocks and stresses type resilience. And lastly, a rapid increase in focus on social sustainability issues. And we've seen those really wrapped up together in ISO 20400, the international standard for sustainable procurement, over the last couple of years. And we're seeing more organizations starting to adopt ISO 20400 and really start to prioritize things. And yet, the modern slavery legislation that was introduced in 2018 after a couple of years of consultation and development has really bumped that up as a priority, and there's a lot of procurement processes, a lot of projects, a lot of supply chains looking at how we prioritize these things. The slide that Tim put up earlier about issues, especially in time of COVID, especially as a lot of larger organizations are starting to get those risk assessments done, looking at not just risk to the business, but risk of harm to people. And social sustainability, as I'm sure you'll know, covers a lot of different things: health and well-being, fairness, inclusion and respect, or diversity and inclusion, depending on which organization you're with. But the common thing is that last bullet point there is the focus on the people involved. So we've come through environmental and economic sustainability, and we're now looking at the people involved, and we're looking through supply chains to see not just the areas that we know about, the people that we know about, but trying to discover the people and the areas that we don't. And that's where I want to get to today. So, this is an example. This is the Song Cafe in Mirvac's headquarters. Yes, it's a 6-star Green Star building, but also from an ethics perspective, an opportunity to look at a social enterprise that is not just trying to minimize harm, that do no harm aspect, but is trying to have a positive impact on the community, on the people there, on the food and drinks served there, that actually can have a positive impact rather than just minimizing the negative. And one of the other issues that has popped up, especially around property and construction, where my background is about gender and lack of gender diversity. It's been going down over the last 15 to 20 years, despite all of these aspects. So there is a real need to look at the people involved, not just in the organization, but all the way through the supply chain to try and make sure that that becomes more representative. There's a couple of major issues with this that I'm just going to touch on really briefly. We can probably loop back to if people have any questions. One of which is how we relate the really high level global issues that are represented here in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs from the United Nations, is what these actually mean in practice when you're a business, an organization, a sole trader, a subcontractor. So it's great to say, zero hunger or no poverty or decent work and economic growth, which is where modern slavery and the ethical issues around labor rights sit. But what does that actually mean when I'm making procurement decisions? And similarly, I'm coming at this from very much a property construction and infrastructure focus experience. There is a real close examination on some parts of the supply chain when you're talking about property, and that may be the design and construct circle just there in the middle in the red box, or the owner and operator and the end user, the building that Tim is in now, and the people that clean it or service it or maintain it. But the length of these supply chains over multi-years, multi-billion dollars, multi-countries means that there's a lot of focus on some parts of the supply chain and a lot of information which is never shared or seen as commercial in confidence, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 around labor and building products, which is where we need to start focusing our risk perspectives and our attention. You'll know these numbers, so this is just a reminder, 40.3 million people estimated to be worldwide in conditions of modern slavery in those 8 types. And yes, Australia, bottom right, may seem to have a very low prevalence of modern slavery, estimated around 15,000 people, according to the Australian government. But our supply chains, as you know, go straight to the Asia Pacific for labor, for services, for materials. And a lot of the places that Australia get their materials from are really very high prevalence and incidence of modern slavery. A word quickly, just to be clear about the difference between work practices and unfair work practices and modern slavery. These are examples. This is from May this year, Hero Sushi being fined nearly $1 million for wages fraud. These were indeed unfair work conditions. These were fraudulent, but this doesn't come under modern slavery. And if we look at this sliding scale from decent work on the left, where work rights are respected, people can choose not to go into work tomorrow, and they're paid fairly. We can see that slide across towards the right with more dangerous or more substandard working conditions to where slavery occurs. So we need to be clear about what is modern slavery and what isn't in the supply chain, and what is already set up to look at those different aspects. So it's important, and I say this to you as supply chain professionals, because through your organizations, different hierarchies, different levels of people will need to know different things. So everyone across the organization will probably need to know what modern slavery actually means and where it exists. And then there's another level up about people who are making more business decisions or procurement or supply chain or project decisions or setting strategies about where direct risks are and where indirect risks are, so business links. And then there's another level up around executive and strategy about processes and policies you're developing, and grievance mechanisms. So do people understand how to contact somebody if they see something that's odd, if they need to report something that doesn't make sense, or if they're concerned for somebody's well-being? And so you escalate up there until there's procurement and supply chain professionals who need to know a lot about that capacity building through the supply chain, because you're only as good as your supply chain's knowledge. And there's no good your organization having all these policies and all these processes if your suppliers haven't got a clue what you're asking them to do. And that last point about remediation, I won't unpick in a lot of details, but remediation in a property perspective has normally been about projects. And in this case, remediation is about making things right for the people that have been impacted. One of the great resources that I come back to again and again is this. It's called the Voices database. It's a collection of narratives. In this case, this is a screenshot from yesterday. nearly 1,200 narratives about people around the world. You can see down that left-hand column the types of slavery involved, the countries where people were or trafficked from, and the date. And you can look at these and look at where your supply chains go, and you can hear stories of real people. This is a young boy called Manon, who was involved in the mica industry. So car paints, cosmetics, that shimmer that you might get in some surfaces. But you can read these stories, you can look at what's happening in different countries, and you can look, in this case, I've circled the point I was trying to make about remediation and understanding what remediation means, because to Manon, he was enslaved for multiple years, but what remediation meant was a chance at an education. And so we need to look at what remediation means when modern slavery is detected and acted upon within your supply chains. And then an example a bit closer to home, this was Grouped Property Services, who really penalized over $500,000 after it treated foreign workers as slaves, prevented them from having access to medical resources, proper living conditions. And what I find interesting here, this is a screenshot from The Guardian, you can see that their clientele, Group Property Services, the cleaning company's clientele, Bunnings, Wilson Parking, Good Life Health Clubs, New South Wales Ambulance, they are still associated with slavery. And you can do a Google search and their names come up. So this is a major risk management issue. And I put that slide about earlier about the long, complex property and construction supply chains. Shipbuilding, ship breaking that occurs along the coast of India. This is one of the unintended consequences, the push for more recycled content in steel for buildings, for example, has led to an increase in human rights abuses in places like India, where shipbreaking occurs. And similarly, mica. I mentioned Manon and mica earlier, but these are well-known documented examples, granite and stone in buildings, rubber, tin. You can look at these worldwide. A very brief couple of reminders about why this is happening. This is a very profitable, I won't say industry, but activity. Keeping people enslaved is very profitable. Annual profits of about 150 billion US dollars a year, according to the ILO. So it's very profitable for people to keep this going and to hide this better and better. We can look, I could spend a whole hour talking about this alone, and I won't go into too much details, but why does modern slavery occur? Well, yes, we can talk about global economic systems, but two things that I've underlined: cost and time pressures. We need it now and we need it cheap. And a focus on the process, not the people. We've got great processes, look at our policies, but we don't actually enforce them, and we don't really know who's involved through our supply chains. And so the one thing that I'd like you to take away from this part of the webinar is that we've got used to looking at risk as being, reputational risk, market risk, financial risk, and particularly operational risk, social license to operate. But the new one here that we have to keep uppermost, as we do with health and safety, is the risk of harm to people. And this needs to come first in a lot of the risk matrices that we've been working with. Key risk areas for property and construction have been around cleaning and security, construction projects, and specific materials. I mentioned stone, mica, granite, as well as in retail operations and the beauty industry. And a couple of very quick points really around the nature of, direct risks, the labor that you hire yourself, indirect risks, the business relationships with subcontractors and subcontractors, but also there's amazing work going on around hotspotting and heat mapping, which Nicholas will touch on, looking at those risks. But the complacency which has been embedded in supply chains over the last decade or so, that reliance on audits, but also, that we are good here in Australia. When you look at audits, this is the Rana Plaza factory collapse, which many of you will remember back in 2013. 1,100 people lost their lives, about 2,500 people were injured badly. But this factory was audited, was inspected the day before this collapse. And they weren't looking for human rights or modern slavery. They were looking at another minor detail about production and outputs. And so the reliance on audits means that complacency can build up. This is one of the reasons that there's a whole wealth of information. Tim and Monica mentioned it at the beginning, the Supply Chain Sustainability School, to provide free learning resources to everyone in your supply chains, in our supply chains, from sole traders up. Videos, toolkits, resources, things like these, the posters to put up around workplaces. These are free, they can be personalized, and they look at, could you spot the signs of someone in modern slavery, to try and not just help people detect it, but providing phone numbers and grievance mechanisms for when that's spotted. So to bring this loop round to the 3-4 principal type of ethics and supply chain decisions, we need to look at within these supply chains autonomy, right, for individuals to make their own choices. I mentioned first do no harm, the non-maleficence, which is one of those concepts that we come back to again and again, and of course justice, which is embedded all the way from those UN Sustainable Development Goals down. But the one I must bring you back to is the one around beneficence, or acting in the best interest of the people, bringing it back to the risk of harm to people and trying to have a positive impact, not just being a little bit less bad. So I won't go into these in details, but there's lots of examples of organizations and supply chains which are no longer doing a little less bad, but establishing positive procurement practices to actually measure the good. Fair Trade, you can look through all of their supply chains. Similarly, the Fair Wear Foundation and clothing, you can see what they're trying to do, establishing positive patterns. And there's a lot of these collaborations that the Property Council now has 25 platform partners that Nicholas will talk about. I've been working with Mining and Resources. There's 10 resources companies led by South 32. And there's a collection around the Telco Together Foundation as well, the TTF, as well as EPSA, which Nicholas may touch on. So just to wrap this part up, what does best practice look like? Well, the Modern Slavery Act is not looking for perfection. It's looking for transparency. It's looking for collaboration and improvement over time. It's looking to send very clear signals to supply chain, that performance management approach, and to make sure that the voice of the worker can be heard. There are grievance mechanisms in place so people can report things, so people can call or email, and establish more partnerships. This, to me, this is Outland Denim. They're an Australian company. They have committed to make all their supply chains, all the companies, every person in their supply chain transparent. So you can see where everything comes from, the companies, the people involved. And this is a great commitment that, again, is setting that positive standard. So this I've put almost 4 times because a coherent approach is critical. You need to have an organization which isn't sending mixed messages to suppliers. We need it cheaper, but we need you to respect human rights. We need it faster, but we want you to measure your carbon emissions. You need a coherent, cohesive approach to all of these things, including reporting. The 7 criteria, which Nicholas will touch on later, are there. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but we need to look at the risks, the actions taken, and how you assess the effectiveness of these actions. And so the Property Council Supplier Platform, I'll share these slides so you can find out much more about it, have created this online resource to connect suppliers and their information and their levels of knowledge with the major partners. And those principles, to go back to the 4 ethical principles that I put up earlier, are to reduce administration for suppliers, limit costs, it's free for suppliers, and encourage supplier education, linked to existing resources and case studies, and enable transparency. You can see those, but keep the platform impartial. So those are the important 2 of those 4 principles that I put up earlier, autonomy and beneficence. So if I'm a supplier, I would receive an invitation email from, in this case, say, Stockland, saying, this is really important. We'd like you to go on and log in. I would go to the Property Council Supplier Platform. I can click there, the circle at the bottom to read the assessment questions, but otherwise create a profile as a supplier. And then I find my way through. You can see down the left-hand side the different sections of the assessment, including, to whom do I already supply? And as you go through, there are links. You can see the 1, 2, and 3 links there. There are links to resources that are there for free to try and increase levels of supplier knowledge and awareness of the issues as you go through. Raising awareness of things like worker dialogue, the importance of hearing the worker voice. You can see there's another 3 resources listed down there at the bottom. And it's designed to be very simple. If you're a simple organization with very low risk, for example, this question, does your organization or labor hire provider recruit employees or workers from overseas? If you've answered no, that's it. That's it for the rest of the section. If you answer yes, and you see how I've changed my answer there from a no to a yes, then more questions drop down. How's that recruitment carried out? How do you communicate the people's rights to them? And as a supplier, I can see my dashboard. I can see, what I've got in process. I can see at any time how I'm doing. But I can also compare my answers. In this case, do I provide any training? Yes, I do. I can see how that compares to other suppliers to encourage that, rising sea lifts all ships. And you can see here how that really fleshes out, so you can start to compare one supplier to another or yourself with your peers. There's an annual reassessment, so I'll be prompted by an annual email saying, can I go in and check that everything is still valid? And from here, I will pass on over to Nicholas for the buyer interface.
That was, when you first showed me all the slides you were going to show, I thought, my goodness, how are you going to get through it? But you did it in commendable time, so really appreciate that. So I'm going to share my screen. Tell me if you can see my screen, Robin. That would be brilliant.
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So as Robin said, I'm going to take you through the buyer interfaces. What does a buyer see once they use the platform, in this case, the Property Council of Australia? So it starts off with the centerpiece, which is the configurable buyer dashboard, where you can basically track and monitor any kind of metric that is relevant to you. And so I'll drill down a little bit further. So how do people actually start when they embark on the journey? Typically, a lot of our clients have literally thousands of suppliers. And at that stage, where do we even start is a big challenge. So what we provide them with is a thing called the Informed 365 Slavery Risk Index, where we push the supplier database through this filter and come up with high risk, very high risk suppliers based on 2 aspects, or actually 3 aspects. One of them is the country risk. The second one is the industry risk. And then there's a combined country industry risk. And what will happen then is typically our clients will start looking at the high to very high suppliers as their first suppliers that they start engaging with. Once a supplier has actually completed the self-assessment questionnaire, or SAQ, then they can also, the buyer can also see what their responses are like, whether the responses are raising any flags as well that might be worth delving into a bit deeper. So I've just highlighted that with survey risk, where you can see that depending on the responses given by a supplier, you get a different rating in the dashboard. So let's look at the Property Council of Australia's platform in more detail. Here in this example, we've got 2,676 suppliers have been engaged, and this was in the early days of it. 2003, this is just right at the beginning, have not started yet. 461 have completed it, and 212 have started it and haven't completed it yet. So if we looked at further down, as Robin said, we want to start drilling down into some of the basics. Outsourced recruitment is a huge one. That's a key risk area. So let's drill into that, or let's drill into things like, is the supplier a reporting entity, which potentially could mean that if they are a reporting entity, that they're a bit more informed around what needs to happen in this space. But in this section, you can look at your labor hire practices. You can look at any kind of metric. You can look at things like, where are the products sourced as well? Are they manufactured overseas, or is that a huge component of that particular supplier's supply? Other aspects that are really useful is you can start drilling down into the geolocations of the suppliers. So you might remember at the beginning in the dashboard, there was a global map. You can literally drill down right down to street level and then look at the individual suppliers. Here I've just gone down to a randomly made up company called Aussie Printing Company that allegedly is sitting in George Street. And then you can obviously click on more information to drill down into their specific information. Now one area, obviously, when you've got thousands of suppliers, you want to put a bit of structure in how you're going to approach the, how do we deal, where do we prioritize suppliers? So one aspect or one tool that we've integrated into our platform is what we call a preference report. The preference report, if you think about it, every single response in a self-assessment questionnaire has a preferred or non-preferred response. Now, in this tool, you can literally stack as many questions as you want on top of each other, and then look at the end, the outcome, and say, okay, this is now ABC Corporation. They've had, in the 4 key questions that we're currently looking at, they've had 3 preferred responses and 1 non-preferred. And so that's how you can start really drilling down and engaging with your suppliers on the key aspects. But it also allows us to see where there might be gaps of knowledge within your supply chain. So it's something that Robin always keeps hammering home, and it's really critical. Suppliers are not expected to be green across the field here. We want to know, or the clients of ours want to know, where are the issues, where are the gaps? So that's what this can start highlighting. Where is the knowledge simply not there? And where's training, raising awareness, et cetera, are key aspects. One feature I really like, because I'm time poor, is the ability, each of these reports has a unique shareable link. So all you need to do is cut and paste that link into a browser, and you come up with the latest up-to-date data as well on the exact same report that you'd maybe done 3 months ago or 6 months ago or what have you. It is obviously key that some of the essential reports are also provided straight into your inbox. So that's also a feature of the platform. People are time poor. You don't want to drill down to information sometimes. You want to say, okay, I want to have these 6 questions. If there's any flags in those, I want that once a week in my inbox. And that's the kind of agility that helps really driving data and better decisions based on the data. Other aspects of the platform, because it is all about collaboration, is the fact that you can track the suggested corrective actions. So we've got a preferred response and we've got a non-preferred response. Suppliers that have given us a non-preferred response, well, here are some resources on how you might be able to fill that particular gap. So it's very much a collaborative tool and an interactive tool. Other aspects, obviously, in the Act, you can't hide behind your tier 1 suppliers and say, look, my tier 1 supplier is sitting in Sydney and he or she buys all the goods and produce for me. And that's as much as I know. You can't hide behind that. Down the track, you're going to have to look at your tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, because that particular wholesaler might be dealing with problem countries such as North Korea or getting textiles out of Bangladesh or Ethiopia. So we have to gain transparency, and this is not something that's going to happen overnight. There's sort of leading companies in this space, such as, say, a Patagonia. They've spent the last 10 years, this is part of their business, to know exactly where their supply chain sits. And Robin mentioned a very good local company, Outland Denim, where they're actually setting up their own factories as well and really managing them in accordance with highest ethical and environmental standards. Other bits that are in the platform as well is, so if you really want to drill down and you are that very highly analytical person, we've also got an integrated report builder that allows literally unlimited analytics, where you can select questions, groups, industries, countries, tier 1, tier 3, and then really drill down into the most specific relevant information that is critical to you. Robin did mention audits and the issues with audits. And again, traditional audits do not work. Modern slavery is a criminal activity. So desktop physical audits, announced audits, do they really work? As we saw with the Rana Plaza, probably it is one of the pieces we need to be looking at. We have to become a bit more innovative in this space as well. We need to start talking to local NGOs. We need to have whistleblowing, hotlines, etc., etc. But just suffice to note that there is also interfaces for audit bodies that can provide data, and that can be integrated into the platforms as well. Another really key aspect is that a lot of the statement planning, you can literally identify questions that literally underpin a criterion within the statement. Robin mentioned there's 7 critical aspects in the statement, and some of the questions literally underpin some of those criteria. And here we've just got a criterion 4 question that literally underpins that particular section. Now, and I'm painfully aware of the time, I could talk as Robin could as well for hours on this topic, but I wanted to be as brief as possible. We've talked about the Property Council. Collaboration works. In the old days, you'd have had Mirvac, Stockland, and all these guys in their own little silos doing their own little bit. What is the impact of that? Negligible. And so we've taken that approach and saying, okay, let's look at other industries where this could also be very beneficial. We've just launched a healthcare, health funds insurance shared platform. And Robin mentioned we've just started launching a shared platform for EPSA, which may not mean much to most of the audience, but EPSA is the industry body for a lot of the utilities companies. So that's the Geminas of this world, South Australia Power, Western Power, etc., etc. So those are the entities that are really leading. And just to maybe highlight why collaboration works really well. We were in one of the first meetings with Stockland, and Davina Rooney, who is now incidentally the CEO of the Green Building Council of Australia, she was sitting in the room, and there was the usual naysayer said, oh no, we're not going to collaborate, and this person shall remain nameless. But Davina stood up in that meeting and said, look, Bob, I'm just going to call this person Bob, it could be Barbara. Bob, if you are in the papers tomorrow with an issue in modern slavery that will reflect badly on the entire industry, and I don't want that to happen. Plus, if we stand up as an industry, the impact and the expectations within our suppliers are much more clearer and consistent. And quite frankly, that was the last we heard from that naysayer. They joined the platform, and they have been a great member since then. Sometimes the penny just has to drop, and you have to be very blunt about things. So other things that I just want to briefly touch on where I think where we're going to go down the track is we need to start connecting the dots. Human rights abusers are typically not very good at health and safety. They're typically not very good at environmental aspects. They may also be a little bit lax on governance in fraud, bribery. What we found is there's a strong correlation. If an organization is doing things well, they do it consistently across the board. Whereas if they start sort of cutting corners and being a bit sort of sneaky in certain areas, we find that those areas multiply across the whole range of key issues around social and environmental aspects. So that was a, I don't know why that slide came in twice, but there we go. That was a very brief run-in, and I'm just checking the time. We have got exactly 11 minutes for questions. And I think, Robin, I saw a couple of really good questions come in. I don't know if you've got access to the question bar. I might just hand over to you, Robin, if you've got a question. Otherwise, I saw one that came in earlier.
Go ahead. If you saw one that came in earlier, I'm just...
Okay, Robin, let me just see. I made a note of this one. What should we do if someone in our organization sees or suspects modern slavery is occurring?
Good grief. There's kind of a hierarchy, like a triage system. Obviously, if somebody is at immediate risk of harm, if you see somebody being loaded into the back of a van, for example, or somebody at immediate risk of harm, then you need to call the police. need to call 000, or the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, on 131237. There is then a sort of a hierarchy of dealing with things. And so there are multiple, whistleblower hotlines or grievance mechanisms set up by organizations, which tend to be for either internal and supply chain. And so reporting things, using those, notifying people. But there's also multiple ways in which to ask the expertise of people like Anti-Slavery Australia, the Freedom Partnership, Be Slavery Free. For their advice, they can even arrange translators. The one thing that I'll just stress is that it's really important. People who are in conditions of modern slavery have often lost their autonomy. And we talked about, autonomy as that first ethical principle. It's important to ask consent before you. Obviously, if somebody is at risk of immediate risk of harm, you need to report it. But otherwise, it's important to gain consent before you take action because of what you might not be able to see. So, for example, if people are, in a bad situation, you need to get consent before you report it in case other people go on to be harmed, or families, or colleagues, or peers. And so, I mentioned triage. It's important to gain consent before you take that action, but you can, of course, get advice from people like the Anti-Slavery Australia about different courses of action.
Thanks, Robin. You know what? I have nothing to add to that. That was as comprehensive as an answer we can have on that one. Let's talk a really simple one here. Should an organization just put simple clauses in their contracts to protect themselves as soon as possible? And that's it. Our responsibility is all over, and we can sort of keep doing what we're doing. Is that an answer?
It's an answer. You mentioned audits. I think contract clauses, and there's model contract clauses going around now. They're an important part of the jigsaw. They're an important part of the approach. Personally, I find that a contract clause that says it is not acceptable for any of our suppliers to have modern slavery anywhere in their operations and supply chains is just unrealistic. I mean, if you can't guarantee it about your own operations and supply chains, I don't know how you can expect your suppliers to. There are much better wordings around those clauses about, best endeavors. We want our suppliers to take best endeavors, and also about, have not knowingly engaged in. Because there are practices, cost and time shaving, reducing practices that will directly contribute to human rights abuses. And so I think, clauses around not knowingly engaged in or not employed or subcontracted to organizations that have knowingly engaged in, much better wordings. And I think there are much better, contract clauses can be really encouraging around better practices and education and what you want to see than, having a blanket, push a stat deck across the table, sign here, which tends to either make organizations lie or shy away.
You're on a roll, Robin. I've got another one, I think, straight up your alley.
There's a question that's come in. Damn, that's another one for me. Has anyone got any questions for Nicholas?
I'll read it to you. Why does the garment fashion industry continue to source product from third world sweatshops that include child labor? Surely this is a high profile, high risk sourcing strategy. Why? Robin?
Because they're cheap. Because traditionally, myself included, I'm not making any moral judgment, we have not asked where our stuff comes from. We have wanted $5 t-shirts and $10 lamps and $3 stationery because it's convenient and it's cheap, and we haven't asked where it's come from or environmental or social impacts associated with it. I think the more that particular suppliers can actually be more transparent, the better. I put up that slide about the Rana Plaza factory collapse, and you saw that, and I said 1,100 people lost their lives. Benetton has still not paid 1 cent of compensation, not one. They have shied away, they have obfuscated, they've used legal clauses. Primark, however, used it as a way of radically changing their supply chain to better behavior, to positive behavior. And so I think this cost and time pressure is why we continue to source product from sweatshops. And I think the more visible we can be, the more transparent, then the better.
Let me see, there's a couple more here. Now we've done the, what do we do when we identify modern slavery?
There's a second part. Do we need to work with the supplier? The answer is yes, because I think, if you talk about risk of harm to people, taking that procurement, taking that contract away from a supplier can actually leave people in a worse situation. So a bit like performance management, with an employee, there is a need to say very clearly, this is not acceptable. This is how we will work with you to change this, and it needs to happen by this date. So it's setting very clear expectations, but it needs to be a collaboration, because what you want is for your suppliers to come to you and say, I am concerned about this practice. I am concerned about these people. I am suspicious of that. You want that communication. And if you come down too hard, that's it. We've terminated. You may lose that opportunity to have a positive impact.
Here's one last one. I think we both have to contain ourselves to 30 seconds. I think we can both have a crack at this. How do we prioritize modern slavery with all the other things that are jostling for our attention, like petty things like budgets and projects and health and safety?
Did you just say petty things like budgets?
Yeah. That's almost irrelevant. No, I'm just kidding.
It is one of the many things that are jostling for attention, and it's a case of and not or. I think a lot of people are being expected to take modern slavery and human rights and social sustainability sort of into their portfolio without the FTE, without the resources behind it. And what I said earlier on in my presentation about a coherent process, coherent strategy, is that the organization needs to say collectively as a group, this is an important issue for us. And in these cases, it is more important than cost, or in these cases, it is more important than time, and set the priorities. And that means setting resources alongside those so that it's not 0.05 of an FTE trying to cope with human rights in our supply chain. It is actually resourced properly to have that positive impact over time. So yes, there's lots jostling for position, especially around COVID-19 and procurement and supply chain decisions, which have been massively disrupted. But it is a case of setting that from the top.
Absolutely. And if I can add something, I think technology has to play a really big part in this. Big data and the analytics that go with big data have to underpin it. As I mentioned earlier, some of our clients have 10, 15, 20, 30,000 suppliers. How do you even start managing that massive supplier without a tech solution? Tech has to make life easy in this space. And ensure that processes are more efficient. And then collaboration, obviously, if you get economies of scale where you get a whole bunch of companies doing the same thing, there's economies of scale right there as well. So the burden, a financial burden on organizations can be decreased as well. So be smart about it as well and do things and collaborate. This is a non-compete space. We all want the same outcome. Well, no, the guys and girls that are doing child labor and modern slavery, they don't want the outcome we want, but we all do. So let's work together. I think that's the biggest message. And on that note, I think, Robin, you and I have to now sort of zip it for a little second and hand back over to Monique and Tim Proust.
Great. Tim, your last comments, please, in thanking our keynotes for today before I close the session.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Monique. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Robin, and thanks, Nicholas. That's been very informative and very comprehensive in terms of the analytics involved in working out what the situation is with individual supply chains. I really appreciate that. I'm sure we all do. I haven't seen anything that comprehensive before, so it's very, very much appreciate your input today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Great, and thanks members for joining. It's exactly on 2 o'clock. Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Robin. We'll have some more live Q&A in our closed LinkedIn group that can take place once today is over. So thanks, guys, and stick around if you're keen to talk about registration under the Professional Accreditation Scheme, and I'll share my screen. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Monique.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.